I forgot what the next video is because I didn't have my notes pulled up. Oh, I'm a professional, by the way. So, you have all of your stuff lined up. You've brought your fancy, over-expensive books. You have watched all of my videos on how to set up a campaign. Now, the next thing you need is players. Time to call up that old high school buddy and see if he wants to sit down for some rolling dice and chaotic boning of everything in sight. Probably shouldn't do that.
Riser, double.
I take how much damage? So, in the world of Dungeons and Dragons, or I should say in the world of playing Dungeons and Dragons, perhaps the biggest hardship that a lot of people face is finding a group to play with. And the very first inclination in a lot of people's minds is to immediately go and round up their friends and have everybody sit down to try to play the game of Dungeons and Dragons. Now, I have been a big proprietor in the past, and I still am, of everybody should play Dungeons and Dragons at least one time with a good dungeon master. And the reason I say that is because it is so incredibly difficult to not be into Dungeons and Dragons. If you are a nerd in any sense of the word, and you like fantasy in any sense of the word, there is a Dungeons and Dragons campaign out for you. Whether you like high fantasy, gothic fantasy, steampunk fantasy, dark fantasy, whatever the case may be, you can mold a campaign to your liking in order to create the type of fantasy you want to experience. Today, I have for you 3 reasons that this video is titled, Your Friends Don't Make Good Players. And the first one ties into what I was just talking about how there's a type of fantasy for everybody. But not everybody likes every type of fantasy. You would be hard-pressed to find a genre of fantasy that I'm not into. My favorite world is Eberron, despite the fact that I'm not that big into steampunk. I'm always down to play inside of Eberron, which is a very steampunky world. I typically enjoy high or gothic fantasy, but you can also put me in a dark fantasy world and I will find a way to have fun and enjoy the story there as well. But I am not other people, and most people are not me. Most people like specific types of fantasy, but going on to that, most people want to experience Dungeons and Dragons in very specific ways. I personally am a big fan of, and that's why all the campaigns that I run are adventure campaigns. Now, I haven't done a full video on adventure campaigns yet, but to give you the overarching basis, an adventure campaign is your players start at one point on the map, and they have to make it to another point on the map while achieving a goal for an overarching plot. I personally like this genre of games, and I don't particularly like sandboxes, dungeon crawlers, or even plot-heavy campaigns, because I do like my fair share of combat. And so, because of that, you'll often find that a lot of people get bored in certain types of campaigns. Now, if you're the type of dungeon master who can run multiple campaigns because you have that ability, which is not something that every dungeon master has. I can't run sandboxes. I also can't run dungeon crawlers, and I get hella bored running plot-heavy campaigns. I run adventures because that's what I like and that's what I'm good at. Some dungeon masters can run types of campaigns that they don't like, or some people like all types of campaigns so they can run in all of those. But chances are you're probably not that kind of dungeon master, and you're probably not that kind of player. So while you might call up your high school buddies and bring them all together, not everyone's going to be interested in the campaign you're running, either the type of fantasy setting you have or the type of campaign that you're running. Maybe they like gothic fantasy, but an adventure gothic fantasy isn't what they had in mind. They instead wanted to spend way too much time getting to know everybody within the town that you start in, and so the adventure kind of turns into a plot-heavy campaign. Maybe they like high fantasy, but they don't like sandbox campaigns. So the great magical world where they can meet all the elves and kings and all of this stuff, they're not really into that because they would prefer if they had a plot line that they could follow and not some thin overarching thing. Watch my video on sandbox campaigns for more information on why I don't particularly like sandbox campaigns. Maybe they really enjoy steampunk fantasy, but dungeon crawling's not their thing. Because of this, a lot of times people will just try to play with their friends because, well, I can't find a group and I might as well hang out with my friends, so I'll be here anyway, but because they don't particularly enjoy what's going on, they're not the best player, and being a good player is a lot more than just showing up. I think I've done a video on how to be a good player. I probably should if I haven't. That'll probably go on the Google Doc. I'll check after this video, but it's one of those things where there's a lot that goes into being a good player, and part of that is being invested in what's going on. And if you're so bored that you're always on your phone, or you're reading a book, or you're staring at the paintings on the wall, or whatever the case may be, then you're probably not going to end up being the best player. And that leads me into point number 2. Things can go wrong in Dungeons and Dragons, and I've seen it, and in fact, I've experienced it tear apart friendships. I think I'm going to make it a subscriber special, like maybe 5,000 or something, but at some point I'm going to tell you guys about the worst campaign that I ever DM'd, where a small mistake on my part snowballed into me losing an entire friend group. Mistakes in Dungeons and Dragons happen. And the problem is that you have to have people who are willing to understand those mistakes, especially when the dungeon master is new and the players are new. There's a lot of things that people do wrong. Now, you might be one of those people who say there's no wrong way to play D&D, and I agree with you, because the only wrong way to play D&D is when everyone's not having fun. But there are still mistakes that you can make. There's still calls that the dungeon master might make because they're under the mistaken impression that the dungeon master is God, and the dungeon master is not God. Or there might be things that the players do that really ruin the experience for the rest of the table. And small, minute things can end up snowballing out of control that create a very, very bad experience for everyone involved. And so it's very difficult to make your friends be good players, or have your friend be a good DM, and the friendship is still intact after that. The final reason that I think it's not really a good idea to just call up all of your friends and ask them to come play D&D is because most people, especially ones who are newer to the game, don't really understand what it's about. Everybody thinks it's like board game night. You know, we're all sitting around the table and playing fantasy version of Cards Against Humanity, or Monopoly, or whatever fucking random board game you pulled out. Board game night is for being drunk and being silly and having, you know, being rowdy and all of that stuff. But Dungeons and Dragons, and this is going to sound cringe and I understand, but Dungeons and Dragons is a very serious game. And while it has its funny moments and its chaoticness from time to time, it's a game that you need to play while you are paying the utmost attention. It's a game that you have to have as much attention as you can to it, because there are story elements. You wouldn't read a book while simultaneously looking up and around and being drunk. Like, I mean, actually drunk, right? Some people like to have wine with their reading, but I'm talking about like actually being so drunk that it's hard for you to focus, right? Reading a book is something that you pay attention to. Watching a movie is something that you pay attention to. And that is the same thing with Dungeons and Dragons. It's something you have to pay attention to. You have to be involved in. And so a lot of times people have this mistaken idea of what Dungeons and Dragons is. And so gathering a whole bunch of your random friends who may or may not be interested in playing a game where you have to sit around a table for 4+ hours and pay attention to what's going on might not be the best idea. That's not to say that you should never bring any of your friends to your D&D campaign. I'm all for introducing new players into the hobby so that we can continue to grow. Because unlike some weird gatekeeping people, I am happy for things like Critical Role and Dimension 20 and the pop culture boom of Dungeons and Dragons, which has gotten more people into the hobby and kept it alive. The more people that play our game, the more that our game is going to thrive. And so I'm all for bringing new players in, but you might want to vet people a little bit. You know your friends better than people who don't know your friends. So it's probably best that when you're thinking of friends you want to bring to the game, you think of people who will actually like the game. And if you yourself don't even know if you'd like the game because you've never DM'd before, then you should probably go onto something like Roll20 or onto online, even in my Discord server, as long as you're at least 18 years of age or older, link down below so that you can hop in and talk to people and see if you can find a group. We have an entire channel in there for Dungeons and and Dragons, and there are people that are always looking for other people to play with online, and so you can kind of check that out. There's ways to find groups, and I'll probably do another separate video on that, but I really would not recommend trying to DM if you don't know if you would even like Dungeons and Dragons to begin with. So, outside of that, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think down below. And as always, a great big special thank you to everyone who's been supporting me lately. I feel like I say this every video, but it's absolutely blown me away that this channel has gotten even a minuscule amount of success. I expected to be doing this for ages before any of these videos popped off. So thank you again for the support. Thank you again for the love. And I will see you in the next one.